We have with us two colleagues from Italy, from the University of Trieste, Giulia Iannuzzi and Professor Guido Abbattista. Professor Guido coordinates the GlobalSeaRoutes, a project in the University of Trieste, aimed to study the sea routes on a global scale in the modern and contemporary ages. And the presentation today is going to be made by Giulia Iannuzzi. As you know, the Digital Humanities Hangouts are a close collaboration between the Digital Humanities Hub from Lancaster, from the Digital Humanities Lab in Ghent, and the Digital Humanities Lab in New University of Lisbon. Giulia has a Bachelor of Arts and a Master of Arts in Italian Literature, Modern Philology from the University of Milan. She is currently involved in a PhD on early modern history in the University of Florence. She works on the University of Trieste. Areas of interest are modern history, cultural history, global history, and speculative fiction. She publishes intensively, so what I could see lately, on science fiction in the digital age and spatialization of time. She's a researcher in the already mentioned project GlobalSeaRoutes. So once again, thank you, Giulia, for being here for the presentation, and thanks also to Professor Guido Abbattista for accepting this collaboration and this conference. Once again, welcome all. You can put your questions in the chat, beginning with the word question. And Giulia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Alves. I'd like, on my part, to thank you and all the other organizers of this Hangout for hosting this event, and a special thanks to Catherine Bellamy for helping out with the technical check and preparation. And so I'm grateful to the University of Lisbon, Lancaster, and Ghent for hosting these events. And of course, I'd like to thank my principal investigator, Professor Guido Abbattista, for allowing me to be the face and the voice of our project today. So I'll now share a PowerPoint presentation, which you shall now see. Just let me know if you see the presentation correctly. I'll now go in mode slideshows for you to have it full screen. Is that
yes?
That okay?
It's all fine. Yeah.
Thank you. So this presentation today is intended to outline GlobalSeaRoutes. As Professor Alves outlined briefly, it's an ongoing project aimed at the study of sea routes on a global scale in order to understand how the degree of world interconnectedness evolved during the modern age, roughly from the 16th to the 19th century, from the standpoint of maritime journey times. So the project was designed by Professor Guido Abbattista, and it is based at the Humanities Department at the University of Trieste in Italy. And it is an interdisciplinary cooperation between historians, such as Professor Abbattista or myself. On my part, I mainly work on research and data entry, with the help of geographers, and Professor Andrea Favretto in particular took care of designing the geodatabase for the project. And we have also the collaboration of software developers specialized in digital tools for historical research, our colleagues at Lab 1100. So today I really have the pleasure of being the voice of a collective enterprise, so to say. And while introducing GlobalSeaRoutes, I hope this presentation will maybe put forward some remarks of more general interest on how geospatial technologies such as geographical information systems, GIS, contribute to, or may contribute to, our understanding of the geographies and times of distances in the past. So our project, GlobalSeaRoutes, is based on data collection from both primary unpublished archival sources, such as manuscript ship logbooks, and from published sources such as accounts of specific voyages or secondary sources whenever available, such as catalogs or published collections of multiple voyages. A comprehensive collection of data on European global navigation during the modern age, of course, would require an impressive work of research and data entry. To mention but a few examples, to account for English navigation, relevant sources are to be found in the archives of the India office at the British Library in London, but also at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich and at the National Archives site in Kew. But for the British East India Company, to dwell a little bit more on this example, we have a comprehensive catalogue of logbooks which was compiled in the 1990s as a print directory for archival purposes at the British Library, the Farrington catalogue that you can see in the current slide, which makes for a particularly useful source, in our case, thanks to the summary of each catalog logbook that one might find inside. For French navigations, the Archives Nationales in Paris is of interest, but also the Archives Centrales de la Marine at the Château de Vincennes. In the French case, it's interesting because, as you can see in the screenshot in the current slide, the research might be really facilitated by the existence of a partially digitized collection of materials pertaining to the French East India Company's voyages to Asia, which are accessible online. Also, the documentation on the Dutch sea voyages are of interest, and these are physically located in the Hague archives, but the Dutch case also comes with a significant aid in the form of a detailed scrutiny of the logbooks concerning more than 8,000 Dutch sea voyages between the Netherlands and Asia from 1595 to 1804. This catalog was published on paper in 1987, but more recently was organized and reworked, for so to say, in an online database, which you can also see in the screenshots in the current slide. And this database, for example, allows for acquiring the data online. And compared to this kind of digital projects, as well as others, we might mention other database focused on national experiences or focused on the activities of specific fleets or companies. GlobalSeaRoutes aims at offering a comparative perspective and I'd say at enhancing the use of its data also in outreaching and teaching activities by offering the possibility of using visualization to navigate and explore the data, and by including digitized primary sources or external links to sources of interest. But I shall go back to this a little bit more in a moment. About cartographic representations, a quick word, because it may be useful to keep in mind that examples of cartographic synoptic representations of global sea routes have been produced on paper, especially but not exclusively in the age of steamship navigation. And while visualization on paper might effectively give, as you can see in this example, synchronic and synoptic views at a given moment in time, of course, they can hardly represent historical change, and they do not support the data retrieval and personalized querying of the data that a digital tool allows. In this regard, there are today important projects concerned with the study of changes of movement and connections in time that we look up to specifically in terms of technological advancement in the field of digital history. You may be familiar with a big project such as Slave Voyages, the transatlantic slave trade database that you can see in the current slide, developed by a huge international consortium of universities based at Emory, or also Orbis, the Stanford geospatial network model of the Roman world would be another case in point, another ideal, another case that we look up to in terms of technical approach to historical data. But here's now, since I'm an historian and I work on data entry, I thought I would offer you an example of a particularly lucky case I had the pleasure of working on, and I'd say lucky in terms of primary and secondary sources. I worked on this case study while Professor Favretto was perfecting the database structure. This would be the circumnavigation of the Austrian frigate Novara. This voyage was undertaken between 1857 and 1859. And this case is particularly rich in primary and secondary sources available because a travel account was published in German right after 1859 and was promptly translated into Italian, but also an English version was published by Cambridge University Press in more recent years. Furthermore, this case was particularly fun for me to work on because the Novara started her voyage from Trieste. At the time, Trieste was the port of the Austrian Empire, and incidentally is the city from where I'm speaking right now, and as I mentioned before, is at the University of Trieste our project is based. And so Professor Abbattista discovered a wealth of documents pertaining to this voyage at the city museums, especially at the Maritime Museum of the city of Trieste, including the catalog of the ethnographical objects collected during the travel that you can see in the current slide. And so I was able, like, these materials allowed me for a particularly rich collection of data. In this slide, you can see a screen recording of me exploring and checking the Novara's case in our data entry environment, Nodgoat, on which I will dwell more in a moment. So after completing the data entry, I'm here showing how it is possible in our data entry environment to select the voyage, explore related entities such as the vessel, which may include embedded multimedia materials, and then how it is possible to check the geographical visualization in which the navigation stepovers have been geo-referenced and chrono-referenced, to show the route with 1 second equaling 1 month of navigation in real life. Of course, a similar wealth of primary and secondary sources pertaining a specific voyage is not always available, and specific issues may arise when working on primary sources which did not use our current system of geographical coordinates, for example, or when working on primary sources that for historical reasons may not be deemed trustworthy. This would be the case typically of logbooks of navigation that took place before the longitude problem was solved, for which, of course, we need to pinpoint any mentioned location by using, for example, other sources, or by infer the most probable routes according to contextual elements, including, for example, seasonality of winds, well-known stopover locations, for example, in case of commercial commissions and so on. So the project straddling global history, digital history, and cartography aims, as I mentioned before, at analyzing, at representing sea connections to understand globalization as a function of overseas expansion, and to foster a better understanding of the temporal dimension of world connectedness and how it changed during the 4 centuries of what we call the modern era. The project is based on the premise that the history of navigation can provide an effective evidence of the modern globalization processes, and so it aims at representing the historical evolution of the duration time of early modern and modern transoceanic sea voyages on a synoptic and comparative scale. And of course, as you can see, the project is particularly concerned with the study of frequency and duration time of maritime journeys. As of today, GlobalSeaRoutes consists of a relational database with a spatial component, a GIS, and a connected web application that would enable the final user to directly querying the data and obtain visualizations, for example, dynamic maps, comparative tabulations, allowing the final user to querying the data according to specific research interests. The object evidently is to exploit IT technologies to perfect a comprehensive and synthetic visualization of historical data, and to offer a geodatabase accessible via the web, allowing the restitution of queries on the part of the final user in graphic as well as tabular or cartographic form. The project, of course, originates from a global history research perspective, and in particular from interests in European sea voyages of exploration and scientific nature, but also of military and commercial nature. Our data model that you can see here in brief tries to account for the complexity of what we mean when we talk about the history of navigation. A complex set of techno-scientific and cultural elements in which the historical evolution of sea voyages is the outcome of changes in shipbuilding and nautical techniques, as well as, for example, in medical knowledge as regards living conditions on board, for example, but also in geographical, naturalistic knowledge, in cartographic equipment, for example, in know-how, in navigation tools and related materials. So the project was established around the beginning of 2019, and the first phase focused on the development of the data model and of a prototype of the database and of the GIS. We structured, or shall I say, Professor Favretto especially structured the relational database and the spatial component, and then we entered data on a small selection of voyages to test the functioning of the system. So as of today, the database, as you can see here, includes data concerning each ship, the name, type, measures, construction details whenever available, such as tonnage, displacement, propulsion systems, but also data concerning the crew, available navigation tools, navigation instruments on board, the identity of the captain, the fleet typology and nationality, and of course, departure and arrival dates concerning each voyage, destinations, place names, sea routes, stopovers, speed and distances covered, as well as data on maps, maps used during the voyage or perfected during the voyage, and references to what the secondary and primary sources we use to extract all these data pertaining to each voyage. In this schema, each attribute that you see marked with a link signifies a connection to the relevant entry in another table. So that, but this is the elegance of our relational model. The data as regards an entity, an object, is entered and stored once and might be reused as many times as necessary. In this schema, you can also see that the table routes have some elements marked by icons of a globe and an hourglass. And these would be the spatial components and the temporal components that needed geographical referencing and chronological referencing. And I highlight this because these were the elements that were kind of key in determining also the needs that we had as regards the tools to visualize and publicate publicate the data. In the prototypical phase, the crucial data of each voyage, and particularly data relating to time, duration, routes, and positions, were entered into a PostgreSQL database, and the geospatial component was handled with QGIS. And as regards data retrieval and visual restitution of SQL queries and the publication of the web interface, we tested different options. But I'm particularly glad to be able to present the project today with you, because these very moments, these days, for a casual as much as pleasant synchronism, might say, mark a pivotal point in the project development in a technical sense, because we are currently taking a significant step with the migration of the database and of the public interface in NodeGoat. NodeGoat is a web-based research environment developed by Lab 1100, in which we found the possibility we needed to handle georeferenced and chronoreferenced data, with the advantage of having a linear and comprehensive workflow from data modeling to data entry to data publication, querying, and visualization. This system allows, for example, for dynamic visualizations in which the chronological element is accounted for in a manner precisely adherent to our data, such as in this visualization of the East India Company's Concord voyage, traced then to the manuscript log in this case, in which you see 1 second representing 1 month of voyage in real life. So with these two, with NotGoat, we can easily enter, manage, and represent several types of data, and we are perfecting a visual interface which has, I believe, a considerable flexibility and user friendliness, allowing, for example, the final user to select and aggregate data, for example, on a chronological basis, or according to nationality or destination or kind of voyage and so forth, and compare this data in tabular form or represent the data with diagrams and visualizations showing dynamically on maps the ships, itineraries and progresses, the routes, the relative navigation speeds of different voyages, and so on. And as you can see in this screen recording, the aim is to obtain a very user-friendly interface, enabling a very fluid switching, a very fluid passage between different kind of visualization. In this case, for example, geo-referenced cartographic form and tabular form. But let me move on to some quick notes on the main ongoing developments of the project and some brief remarks on future perspectives. Our main ongoing developments at the moment are in data entry, of course, with systematic data collection on English, Dutch, French, Spanish, and Italian sea voyages, by using published and unpublished sources, and on the other hand, in the development of the web application, the web interface. And again, this moment marks a kind of an important turning point for the project. In this case, by with the coming on board of two new full-time researchers that are starting to work between this month and January 2021. As for future developments, the conceptual structure of the database, by being inherently modular, of course, opens up significant possibilities for further expansion by including, for example, new voyages accounting for different typologies or nationalities, for example, or by extending the time frame of the data collection. And I believe the possibility to create an international collaboration network would enhance significantly the amount of data we would be able to process and ingest in the database, so would enrich dramatically the information capacity of the project. So this is something that probably we'd like to encourage and cultivate in the future. And in this regard, I'd like to conclude by encouraging anyone interested to keep in touch. And you can see on this slide the email, the contacts of our PI and some contacts for team participants. But I'd also like to conclude by thanking a number of institutions that are supporting the project with their generous scientific and monetary contributions. And also by thanking you all for your attention today. I'm now going to interrupting the screen sharing.
Thank you again, Giulia. It was a wonderful presentation of a great project. We have some questions here also in the chat. Ben asks regarding the process of digitization of maps. I think the question is related to that. If there is anything in the intrinsic character of a map that is lost by digitizing them and or making them interactive. We always lose something in the digitization process. What do you think about maps?
Oh, this is a very interesting question. Thank you very much, Ben, for asking this. This gives me the chance to highlight the fact that currently we are not working on digitization or georeferencing of historical maps. This would be something that I definitely would very much like to look into, maybe in the future. But as for now, we are envisaging the digitization of historical maps to offer them as accessible primary sources accessible via the database. But we are not using historical maps for now, for example, as base for the dynamic visualization of our routes. I hope I was I was able to be clear on this point, and that's at the risk of going a little bit off topic. I'm having personally very much fun experimenting with the David Ramsey initiative, the David Ramsey map collection for georeferencing historical maps.
Yeah, it's a reference.
That's and also NotGoat offers the possibility to use historical georeferenced maps as background of georeferenced visualizations.
But for now you are not using that, but you are using the maps as sources for some of the data that you input in the database.
Yes. This happened in some cases. The Novara case study that I showed in the first part of the presentation was a case in point, but that would also be a historical map from the mid-19th century. So the longitude problem wouldn't be an issue anymore. But also some 18th century logs that have sometimes detailed cartographies of places maybe explored and maps. We definitely look into that kind of primary cartographic sources, but always I'd say using other kind of sources to confirm data from this kind of primary cartographic sources, especially if the longitude issue was
of course. Thank you. Myself, I have one question, probably not a question, I don't know, an observation, because as I was looking at your presentation and the presentation of all the sources that you use and all the archives and all the data that you are compiling, one question that arises from the languages, of course, the problem of several languages, because you used sources from several countries, several archives, several language, Italian. I don't know if you use Portuguese sources also or something, but this is a huge challenge, not only to collect all this data, but also to make them available. Can you tell us a little bit more about what were your choices, your decisions, the process that you use in the meantime?
Gladly. Thank you very much, Professor Alves, for asking this. Yes. Yes, the first maybe the first thing I would need to highlight is that we are currently working on European sources, so exclusively on European languages. And of course, our source base is heavily shaped or influenced by our linguistic competences. Fortunately enough, our PI alone, Professor Abbattista, knows a good deal of European languages, but also the other historians who are coming on board between December and next January were contacted and selected also on the base of their linguistic competences as to be able to deal with archives which are not of course in Italian, nor in the primary working language of the project, which is English. I didn't mention this in the presentation, but this is not to be proposed as a given. Both the data entry and data querying and visualization interfaces, they use English as a vehicular language, and in this, and in our case, does not exclude the possibility to embed or make available sources and references in other languages. But of course, there's maybe a process of reduction of the plurilingualism complexity of the source base in this kind of movement from primary sources to data. I guess this looked like the best option to reach a wider or as wide as possible international audience at the moment.
Yeah, it makes sense, of course.
But I'd like very much to further to develop further reflections on this. Maybe here, if because also the digital history projects, the huge projects I mentioned it at the beginning of the presentation, such as Late Voyages or Orbis. All these projects come from the Anglophone world, and also other projects we look up to. They usually use English as a vehicular language, but I'm always curious and open to know maybe other plurilinguistic options may be out there. I guess as for as far as the user interface is concerned, also a budget problem is involved in the possibility of having a plurilingual tool.
Yeah, probably on the interface, on the layout of the website, it will be probably easier to make available in several languages, but not probably in the data itself.
Sorry, I forgot to say something about Portuguese sources.
That was just a provocation.
I look forward to having on board someone who will work with them, as I myself, I'm unfortunately not skilled in Portuguese enough to cope with.
I'm more than glad to put you in contact with some colleagues from Portugal, so they can help you on that.
I was hoping for something like that. Thank you.
Okay. One other question from Sally. Sally Chambers is one of the organizers of these sessions. Hi, Sally. She asks about the data model that you use, if you are using any existing control vocabularies or any other metadata standards in your data model.
The possibility, well, we started, okay, in the prototypical phase, the simple answer would be no. Since we migrated to the not-GOT environment, the possibilities of using, for example, gazetteers of place names or data set with linked data approach is very much open. And this is something I look very much forward to maybe develop in the future. But at this point, I can't say, since we are just these days migrating the data we have, is not something that we have covered in the data model up to now, but it's definitely something that I look at as being at the forefront of the work we are going to do in the future. Both, for example, for place names, for YIAF on people, this kind of linked data set would, I think, would enhance tremendously the interoperability of our project with other environments. So yes, thank you.
Wonderful, thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. One other, I think it's the final question that we have in the chat. A question about gender. We know that the voyages and the maritime world was not majorly a world of women, but Amanda asks if there is many or any females or female-related names within the research, and if so, if they were also digitized and registered in the database.
Amanda, is that?
Yes, Amanda.
Thank you
Amanda
so
Adams.
very much for this question. I'm so glad to be able to dwell a little bit on a gender perspective. Since I'm an historian working mainly on 18th century sources, I can gladly affirm that at the present moment in the selection of voyages that we use to perfect the data model, no non-male names came up, but I know that some names will definitely come up in the future. At least for my area of expertise, the 18th century, I can definitely say that there are at least a few voyages in which women travelers were involved, often under not just under pseudonym, but under false male identities. And so as an historian of the 18th century, this is something which I very much look forward to have to account for in the database. And yes, the entity person is definitely designed to accommodate also this kind of biographical inquiry into the protagonists of our voyages. So thank you very much for giving me the chance to open a window on the gender perspective.
Thank you, Giulia, for that. Thank you.
I think there is no other question, but one that I have, as we all saw that you are using Node-GOAT as now as the main base system for the project. Do you have any perspective when it will be open, available for a general audience?
Yes, thank you very much for asking this. I should have mentioned this, I guess, in the presentation while talking about further developments. And my principal investigator might always correct me if I'm wrong. I believe our current project phase, which will end up in the publishing of the going online of the public interface, is envisaged to end at the beginning in spring 2021.
Oh, great! So that's great news, of course.
Professor Abbattista maybe would like to add something on this, but I see.
Well, this may be a little bit optimistic, but I should say that we are trying to focus on that objective.
Yeah, and we must be optimistic.
We must be
after this year.
Yeah.
It was a whole negative year, so we must be optimistic.
Anyway, our agenda with NodeGoat people and our researcher is such that around that period we should have a critical amount of data and at least an initial public interface ready for going online.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Glad to hear that. Well, we probably should wrap up now. Sally, I don't know if we have already some information about the next sessions of the Digital Humanities Hangouts. We are preparing those for the next.
I was thinking we should discuss that on Monday at our Spatial Humanities meeting.
Okay. So
unless Catherine has any details yet.
I'm afraid not.
No. Okay.
I think we probably need to have our meeting first.
Next week we will have more news about that. So once again, thank you all for being present here, and a special thanks for Giulia and Professor Guido Abbattista. Many thanks for your presentation, and congratulations for your project. And we hope to see you online soon.
Sure. Thank you very much to everybody for your attention and hospitality. Thanks.
See you, Catherine. See you, Sally. See you all.